My name's Sam Marshall. I'm the owner of ClearBox Consulting. We are a specialist consultancy based in the UK and Ireland. And what we offer is vendor neutral, technology neutral strategies for digital workplaces. So if you're struggling to understand how things like Office 365 and all the tools fit together, we can help you bring about some clarity with that. So I'm very pleased to be joined today by Content Formula. I know Dan was having a little bit of trouble getting on with the audio, but Joe, are you there to introduce us?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm Joe Perry. I'm technical director at Content Formula. Content Formula consultancy that designs, builds, and supports digital workplace tools, applications across a variety of technology. So we primarily work with Office 365. But the tools we build are built within SharePoint, Teams, and yeah, we use some out of the box products, Wisdom and Live Tiles to help us build these tools. We're not just about technology; we're also big on user research, the discovery, really understanding our customer, and obviously the user's experience, who the employees are, and building the tools that best work for them.
Hi, this is Dan here, just to introduce myself very quickly. I'm the MD of Content Formula, and I'm joining you today as well.
Good to hear from you, Dan.
Yeah, it's a relief.
Yeah, so we have a little poll to kick things off. What you're going to see in a moment is the question, what should Microsoft focus on improving in Office 365? We'd just like to get a bit of feedback from you, the audience, about where you think it should be evolving. If we can pop that poll up, Wedge. So there we go. You'll see you've got a range of options: adding new tools, integration between existing tools, performance, stability, security, adoption of existing tools, or is there something else? And we'd still really be interested. If so, put a comment in the chat box or the Q&A box.
Half of the people have already voted. This is better than the general election.
Let's not go there. We've only got an hour.
Okay, we're at 65%, so I think there's some undecideds out there. I'm going to end the poll in 5 seconds.
Okay.
There you go. And hopefully the results will show you that integration between existing tools has won with 58% of the results.
Is a clear winner. Yes. Wow. What are your thoughts on that, Dan?
I think it's definitely it definitely makes sense to me. It's certainly what I would have chosen as my top vote, and it's something I'd say that Microsoft is now starting to do more and more. I think one of the most exciting developments we've seen just recently is that with Yammer, we've finally moved on from the dreaded Yammer embed, and we're now seeing much more integration with SharePoint, and hopefully lots more to come as well.
Yes, and I do remember Jeff Teeper on stage saying, we've heard from lots of customers who want more integration, and we hear you. So I think that message has got through. People will be relieved to hear. So on the agenda today, I'm going to take you very briefly through the headline. So what we're talking about is from the SharePoint conference in Vegas that was in May. So I was one of the speakers there, and partly what I'm trying to reflect is the things that actually got a buzz and what people are talking about between the breaks. So home sites from the intranet world for SharePoint, certainly a big thing. Joe's going to talk to you about search and targeting and some of the developments there. I'll cover off Yammer, and then there's a smattering of quite interesting other announcements around things like OneDrive and Stream to cover off. And then we'll, all three of us, talk about what this means for things like intranet, SharePoint, and the intranet in a box market that both ClearBox and Content Formula are active in. So, headlines. Every year, Microsoft, and let's be fair, I think it's Microsoft Marketing, come up with a theme for what SharePoint is. And this year, what SharePoint is the intelligent intranet. Last year, I think it was the modern intranet, and the year before that was all about inner and outer circles and so on. Frankly, I'm a little bit skeptical about whether there is much intelligence in Office 365 yet, but I think the strongest card is what they're doing with search. So that's what Joe is going to be talking you through. And one of the really visible things that your users will start to see is that SharePoint search is going away. SharePoint search that served as well for I guess about 5 years in its current incarnation when they bought Fast, is going to be replaced by something just called Microsoft Search. Home sites are the big news for SharePoint. I'll be covering those in a second. OneDrive is interesting because although it was a SharePoint conference, the demo actually opened talking about OneDrive and not SharePoint. So I see that as a sign that OneDrive is going to become more central in terms of its role across the Office 365 apps and positions as the Files app. Quite a lot of enhancements going to user experience, to things like lists, and I've got a small example of that, and Teams, integrating with Teams. And Jeff Teeper spoke at quite a lot of length about what they're doing behind the scenes to boost performance, make page loads faster, make it more stable. And one thing that I'm not going to talk in any more detail about, but is worth checking out, is the security labels. So you can label something as sensitive, for example, executive only, and have policies associated with that. So you could say only someone in the executive group can unencrypt this file and see it. And that also means that if it's taken outside of the SharePoint environment, it remains encrypted, so it remains safe. But let's talk about that home sites thing. So home sites are described by Microsoft as a communication site with superpowers. When you look at this, it probably does look like a communication site or a hub site at first glance. But it gains a number of extra things. So first of all, if you look at the very top where it says Contoso Electronics, like the company brand, then what that's actually doing is acting as a home button. In the past, when you clicked on something like SharePoint in the Office 365 menu, it's not taking you to an intranet, it's taken to the SharePoint home site, and that's a bit confusing. So that's a good fix. It's the same in the SharePoint app, the mobile experience. So what happens there is that when you click on the home button in the app, then you will actually see the intranet page as well. The old SharePoint page has now become My SharePoint over here. So reminiscent of, I think, Windows Vista when they started talking about My Computer. We now got My SharePoint. And the other thing is, so here's the new Microsoft search box. That gets set to being tenant-wide. So it kind of makes sense that if you're like on the homepage of the intranet, when you search, you should search for everything on the intranet. You'll see down here these blue boxes, like News at Contoso. These are what are called authoritative news sources, and Joe's going to talk a little bit more about those, but all it really does is add a visual clue to a news story to say it's maybe more important than some of the other stuff that will get pulled through. You'll notice there was access to the Megamenus that came out earlier this year. So yeah, you can do a kind of big paddle navigation across the whole site. Just bear in mind that these are basically manual hyperlinks. There's nothing automatically updated if, for example, you change a site name there. So the way to think about home sites, Jed Cawthorne kind of let me use this slide that he produced recently in his CMS Wire post, saying that Microsoft is trying very hard not to say to us we shouldn't view sites hierarchically, but everybody wants to draw a hierarchy diagram, and here's Jed's, and I think it does actually help. So the home site would be the entry point for hundreds or maybe even thousands of users. And then in the rest of the intranet, you've probably got hub sites that might be more aggregating across communication and team sites for a division such as, you know, manufacturing, or a function like HR. Although there's a line here, there isn't actually anything meaningful in terms of the site hierarchy. It would just be that the home site would have to link to these other hub sites. So what does this mean? Well, to some people, it's a missing link for an intranet, for building an intranet with standard SharePoint, in that there wasn't anything that worked well as a homepage. You could kind of make a hub site work. They're certainly very easy to set up. It requires a little bit of PowerShell, but any SharePoint admin will be able to follow the instructions. And it gets rid of that confusion about the old SharePoint start page, which is what this is illustrating, the one that shows news from sites and sites that you're following. What's still missing, though, is, as far as I could tell, and Microsoft weren't very explicit about this, there isn't actually an intranet-wide menu. The only way you could get that is if you create a communication site, turn it into a hub site, and then turn that hub site into the home site and associate every other site with it. In the demo that Microsoft showed, we had like this Megamenu panel, but then when they went to another site, all of these menus disappeared. It wasn't like it was a universal menu system. And although they say news on the home site has a special status, it really is just that label. There's nothing extra coming with that. Dan, we were talking recently about a lot of people are saying, can you now build an intranet just with standard SharePoint? Do you get many requests for Content Formula to do that at the moment?
So yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, in terms of the projects that we're currently doing and that we've recently done, we've used intranet in a box completely. In fact, 100%. All of our projects have been done with intranet in a box. There's an exception, and that's those applications which aren't actually intranets. So it's when we're building, very kind of specific requirements on SharePoint and Office 365, and you just can't describe those as intranets. We are seeing more requests. I would say we're getting more people saying, well, can I have an intranet? Can I have a proposal for an intranet just built directly onto SharePoint? So it is something we're seeing more requests for. Yeah,
and I certainly think that the Microsoft marketing is working in that regard. So at the end of the webinar, we're going to come back and talk about where the position for things like in-a-box products still are. The last thing I wanted to say then before we hand over to talk about search is this is the roadmap for what Microsoft call employee engagement. So things coming very soon, audience targeting, organizational assets is quite handy if you've got, for example, like a brand library that you want everybody to be able to see. Home sites are due Q3, so it might be as soon as late July, early August. Very welcome will be news and page scheduling to say, here's an article that I've written, but I don't want it to be published until 9 o'clock Monday morning. And I'm also very encouraged to hear them talk now about multilingual content publishing being actually on the roadmap rather than just top of mind, which means thinking about it, but we're not ready to commit to it yet. Very few details released so far about how multilingual content publishing will work, but if you're interested, put that in the Q&A and we'll come back to it later on in the session. New site analytics features on the roadmap. Again, didn't really see any details about that we can share with you just yet. So next up is search. I'm going to hand over to Joe.
Thanks very much, Sam. So yeah, as you said before, Microsoft are replacing the SharePoint search experience, the one that we've been used to for near on 6 years or so now, with something called Microsoft Search, a search that uses intelligence to create an enterprise search experience that will provide users and employees with deep, personalized, insightful results that in the background to it all are powered by the Microsoft Graph. And all of this is to hopefully make search more effective for you. We've all spent years in consultancy hours probably trying to get SharePoint search right for your company. This is where hopefully the Graph's going to start stepping in and use its intelligence to actually kind of help out with its understanding of your business and more on top of that. So Graph is a platform that runs in the background to Office 365, and it works to understand who you work with, what you work on, and to deliver you personalized and relevant experiences across all of your applications. One that you're probably most familiar with if you're already using Office 365 is Delve. So when you click into Delve, you can perhaps click on a user profile, one of your colleagues' profiles, and you'll see documents that they've potentially worked on that Delve thinks are relevant to you. So that's one of the Graph experiences that you're gonna see in Office 365. So Microsoft Search, you may well have seen it already in Modern. It's started rollout last month. You're seeing the screenshot on the right here. We actually have this search box that's appearing across more and more tenancies that we work on now. And it uses natural language understanding and artificial intelligence to understand what you're looking for and hopefully present you with more relevant information. And it's not only going to be a part of Office 365, you're actually going to see it baked into your offline apps as well. So things like PowerPoint and Excel. You're going to have this consistent user experience across all of your applications, so that it's no longer this kind of jarring search experience where I would perhaps search from my intranet to find intranet content. I potentially search on my Windows 10 desktop to search for content on my laptop, or go to OneDrive. Microsoft Search is trying to roll up this search experience and make it consistent across all of the applications on Office 365. And so some of the good stuff that's coming out of this is that content's going to become searchable in seconds. So when I create a new document, it's going to be in the search index within seconds. A problem with SharePoint Search at the moment online is that if I create a document, if I create a piece of content online, it can take anywhere up to an hour to appear in search. Microsoft is keying or coining the phrase that now it's going to be 30 times faster than what it is at the moment. And everything is synced back to Microsoft Graph. So each time that Search indexes your files, it's going to sync back to Graph, and Graph's going to learn and adapt to how you're using the Microsoft Search. And as I mentioned, it's going to be incorporated into productivity apps. So you can see on the screenshot on the right here that you will be in a PowerPoint application now, and I can actually carry out a search in context within my document for documents that are potentially related to this document, or I can search for anything, and it's going to be that kind of consistent experience that I'm used to from my SharePoint Modern sites. My Office 365 site is now going to be on my desktop as well.
Joe, I saw a little demo at the SharePoint conference, which actually went further than that, which I thought was really interesting. And it's based on the insight that when you're working on something, you actually spend a lot of time clicking from window to window, copy pasting, and as you craft something together like a PowerPoint presentation or a Word document. And in this demo, they actually had somebody who was typing away in a Word document, and he typed something, and literally a little pop-up box came up and said, "Oh, do you want to stick this image in here?" And it automatically suggested an image that was in context and obviously relevant to what he was typing, taken from his files. I thought that was a neat file. A neat thing. Be interesting to see where that goes.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. This productivity enhancements like that it's going to be really useful for the employee. And we're also going to get a lot more developer endpoints. So for the devs there, we're going to have the ability to create these consistent experiences, not only in Office 365, but in other enterprise applications as well. So there's going to be a lot to this, for developers as well. Now, the still missing parts, or the gaps, I guess, in this, as I say, it uses the same engine as Delve. And Delve produces a lot of noise. It doesn't always know what projects I'm collaborating on with my colleagues. Obviously, some of my colleagues are working on projects that I have no interest in. And at the moment, Graph doesn't have a great way of dealing with that. And obviously, people outside of your work circle are perhaps working on the same kind of documents and presentations and projects that I am. And it isn't necessarily going to link up that knowledge to kind of share those interesting documents with me because I'm not collaborating with them. And this is where things like enterprise graphs are something that aren't part of Microsoft Search yet. There's certainly Microsoft projects out there that are looking into this sort of technology. So enterprise graphs possess a deep understanding of your business, which uses intelligence to decipher who actually works on what across a variety of business functions and applications, not just Office 365. So is Search going to be the savior that connects all the dots in kind of workers' daily lives? The answer is probably not yet, but it's certainly a good step forward for Microsoft right now. One of the other prominent topics lately with Microsoft is the ability to target and personalize modern intranets. and perhaps more specifically, audience target too. Audience targeting is all about getting the right content to the right audiences. It personalizes your employees' view of news and information across applications. It doesn't make sense for people in New York to hear about car parking issues in Manchester, say. So Microsoft are giving out new ways for us to do this, to achieve these personalized and targeted experience. One of those ways are personalized web parts, where you're going to have a lot of web parts now that are kind of in the user's context. So it will be my recent files, my teams that I'm part of, and my events that I've been invited to. So there's lots of web parts coming out around this stuff. In May as well, we had audience targeted news. So we're going to be able to target various news to different people within the business. So I could use my existing Office 365 groups and security groups to target news to various people. So that's a feature that's getting rolled out. You can see towards the bottom of this screen, this page rather, where I can kind of select an audience now within my news article and state that these people are kind of the most relevant for this. It's not permissioning, it's not completely locking them out of this news article. It's just going to be a way to push news to various users. And we're soon going to be able to build more relevant modern mega menus. So again, targeting and personalizing our mega menu experience so that we can create kind of perhaps task-driven employee experiences. And I need to menu where HR users potentially see a different navigation to marketing users, who see a different navigation completely to IT users. So Microsoft are rolling out changes in July that will allow you to start targeting using your security groups and using your Office 365 groups as well to kind of show and hide various parts of your mega menu. So there's lots of kind of useful features here around targeting and personalization that came out of the conference last month.
Maybe one last thing on that targeting thing, Joe, is I think people have heard with hub sites, you can use that to roll up content. So if you associate 3 communication sites with a hub site, the news will pull from those 3 subsites through. But that's not the only way to aggregate content or do roll up. You can actually use the highlighted content and the audience targeting that Joe just showed as a way to pull from any site, even if it's, for example, news in a different hub site.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the highlighted content's definitely going to be really useful for surfacing up that content from other parts of the intranet or digital workplace. It's
so powerful. I can really see people tying themselves in knots with it if they're not careful.
Definitely.
Right, let's talk about Yammer. So there was a Yammer session called Now and Next. It was basically their roadmap session. And it wasn't very well attended, which is a bit disappointing because I understood there were some quite big changes coming for Yammer this year. And maybe the thing that struck me most was just a clearer sense of purpose from the Yammer team. So they positioned Yammer as being these 3 things now. It's about leadership engagement, so dialogue, top down, bottom up. Corporate communications, so amplifying messages that might be appearing elsewhere, such as on an intranet. And communities and knowledge. So they talked quite a lot about the knowledge management side of things. What struck me was they said they have more developers working on Yammer than the product has ever had before. So this is a big investment, and there's always rumors about is Yammer going away, but that says to me actually no, they are putting a lot of effort into bringing it up to speed. Unfortunately, because Yammer was on an entirely different technology to the Office 365 stack, quite possibly not much of that feels very visible in terms of doing the necessary groundwork to integrate. So the phrase he used that I rather liked was that Yammer is about large-scale participatory conversations. And that's, to me, more appealing than the inner and outer loop unraveling that we're trying to do to differentiate from Teams. Some of the things that they've announced then, so Yammer results will appear within Microsoft search results, in effect. It's not perfect, so if you search for HR policy, it would have one result block that might show something from SharePoint and another result block that might show discussion from Yammer. It doesn't say that the Yammer discussion is the highest ranking hit of all, but still, it's there on one page, which is better than what we've had before. They talked about the live events element. So this is something that was announced before, but it is basically using the video capability that you'll see in Skype for Business and Microsoft Teams for something like a live town hall broadcast. And the idea is that you can then use the Yammer functionality to take a Q&A from the audience. Data hosting has been a long-standing issue for a lot of companies using Yammer because up until recently, all the content was held in the US, whereas for other parts of Office 365, they have data centers in, say, Ireland, for example, that comply with EU regulation. The good news is that now, when you create a new Yammer network, you have the option of that residing within the EU. The bad news is that it's only for new Yammer networks. So if you've been using Yammer for a while, they didn't say they had a migration path available for you to come over. You'd have to stop that and start again within the EU. They were very excited about rich text, you know, like bold and italic. I must admit, I just assumed it had been there for years, so I was a bit surprised that this was a big thing and cutting edge in 2019, but there you go. And one thing they did talk about was the people card, which I'm looking forward to. It's been a bit of a bugbear of mine for a while that if you saw a document in SharePoint and clicked on it and it had Dan's name on it, I would see the delve details for Dan. But if on the same page I saw a web part from Yammer that had Dan's making a comment and I clicked on Dan's name, it would be his Yammer profile, not his Office 365 profile. What they've announced is that everything will now be the same delve profile, if you like. Another thing that you maybe would think Yammer had for years and hasn't is report content. So the ability for any user in the network to say, I think this is inappropriate, or moderators, can you have a look at this? They're aware that that is heavily in demand and it's coming. But the big interesting feature that they had to announce was Yammer Q&A, which is rolling out right now, end of June, they said. So the idea of Yammer Q&A is that either a moderator or the person posting it can tag the post as a question, and it gets these little speech bubbles. And then as you get the answers in, the questioner or a moderator can say, mark that as best answer, and it pops to the top as the best answer with a tick on it. So it's the kind of thing that you often see in things like software support forums where someone says, I can't get Alexa to connect to my network, and after 17 different answers, someone comes up with the right one, and that's the one that you want to see first of all. And then there's a section called Other News. And do you know what? There were 101 interesting little things that Microsoft talked about, but they are quite little. They are refinements where if you use Office 365 day-to-day, you'll say, oh, that's good, I'm glad that's happening. But there's nothing where that you could say, right, that's it, we're definitely going to abandon G Suite and move over to Office 365 because this has made a massive difference. But they're still worthy of note. So OneDrive, as I said, we're positioning this as the Files app for Office 365. And you'll notice that the look of it now is a lot more like if you go to the Office 365 portal. So it's starting to recommend files. It's using the graph to say what are interesting files happening around me. Another subtle change is that these are now called shared libraries. They used to be called shared sites because they're in SharePoint. I can get my lips around all these sharing things. Shared libraries. And intriguingly, you're going to be able to create a library outside of a SharePoint site. So it's a document library that lives natively within OneDrive. I'm not sure that's a great idea, to be honest. I already worry that people collaborate too much in OneDrive rather than treating it as personal cloud storage, but there you go. I'm sure some people will find that fixes a lot of problems that they have. They've also been doing an awful lot of thinking about how to make password link sharing easier. So at the moment, if you send someone a link from OneDrive and say, only Wedge can open this, then Wedge has to sign in with a Microsoft account, which might be like a Hotmail or Outlook account or his his own Office 365 before he can see that. And that's a bit of a pain. Something like Dropbox doesn't make you do that. With OneDrive, the only way you could get around it is by sharing a link which is fully public. What they're rolling out now, and some people already have it live, is that you can send people a passcode instead. So they click on the link, it asks for the passcode, you put in like a 8-digit code, and you're already in. There's no need to actually authenticate beyond that. And the other thing they were quite excited about was what they called a request files folder. So imagine that you are organizing a conference and you've got 10 speakers and you want all those speakers to submit their PowerPoint deck into a folder. You can send them a link as a request files folder, and they'll each have access to upload their presentation into it. Now you might say, well, I thought I could do that already, Sam, but actually to do that right now with OneDrive, you would have to make everybody an editor of that folder. And it means that everybody who goes into the folder could see all the other presentations. With the request files, that's not the case. You can only see content that you've submitted. One of the questions we had in from Simon was about syncing. And the other big thing they've been doing behind the scenes with OneDrive is what's called differential sync. So this is something that they introduced for Office 365 files, so Word, Word and PowerPoint and so on, where if only 1 kilobyte out of a 10 megabyte file has changed, it only syncs that 1K change. What they've been working on now is applying differential sync to any kind of file, even if it's not a Microsoft file, so that 100 gigabyte video with only a 1 meg change would only sync that 1 meg, so it should make it a lot more efficient. Kaizala was a well-attended session. If you don't know Kaizala, it's Microsoft's kind of corporate WhatsApp rival. Quick promotion of a couple of Clearbox blog posts done for us by Susie Robinson as a guest blogger. So the idea of Kaizala is that it's mobile first. And as you can see, you can share photos, you can have discussions on it and so on. And I was a little bit unsure about Kaizala when I first heard about it and started playing with it. But when I saw this slide about use cases, the one that really grabbed me was this about first line engagement. They said, well, you know, what if, for example, you've got seasonal workers, maybe they're picking vegetables for 2 or 3 months of the year, and then they go off and do another contract. There's no way you're going to give them Office 365 licenses and email addresses and so on, but you still need to talk to them about shifts and announcements and maybe get health and safety documents out to them. So for them, Kaizala is great because they can just sign up with a mobile phone number. And they did a demo that was really quite neat as well, which would work great for a town hall scenario where you can set up a Kaizala group and say anybody within 100 meters using GPS for the next 10 minutes can join this group. So if you've assembled a bunch of people in the middle of the field, you can say, right, open your Kaizala apps. You should now see the field town hall meeting. Come and join it. And then you can use the Kaizala app as a way to do polls, Q&A, do a quiz at the end, get feedback, even share files and so on. It's a really kind of neat way to overcome the enrollment barrier that we often see for other kind of employee messaging apps. And then they talked about Stream. So Stream as the video application within Office 365. A lot going on there in terms of embedding Stream. But what I wanted to highlight was the way in which they are using indexing of spoken word. So you can do things like, say, table of contents here based on machine learning to actually listen to the audio track and say, the word safety appears at 1 minute 33 and 8 minutes 55 within this. And then when someone searches for safety, it will bring up the video without anyone actually having to manually tag that safety is something that appears in the video. The other thing that's a challenge often with video is that maybe an employee wants to watch it on the train home and there's lots of tunnels, so playback's tricky. You can mark a video as being for offline playback and it will download it onto the phone, but crucially it remains encrypted, so it's safe for them to do that. It doesn't matter if the device gets taken, for example, or stolen. They also talked about the ability to embed a poll halfway through the video using Microsoft Forms. So you could do maybe like an instructional video and halfway through a little quiz to check understanding, which I thought was quite neat. And then there's a lot about lists and UX improvements to lists and so on, which always gets big cheers, just to as a measure of how techie this conference is. But I think that actually, I will admit that I nodded approvingly in true English form rather than whoops and jumps, is Excel imports. So for a long time, you've been able to create a SharePoint list by importing an Excel worksheet. But they've made the interface a little bit more powerful now. So here you can see the creating a list. You can say from Excel, you pick the Excel file, and it's smart enough to say these are recent Excel files that you've worked on in your OneDrive, for example. And then it analyzes the headings, the columns, and suggests appropriate kind of data values for it. And before you finish the import, you can edit those and say, okay, country, currently saying single line of text, let's make that a pick list based on the values. And this one as random text, I don't want that, so don't import it. And this one, budget, it looks like numbers, but it's actually currency, so set that as type currency within SharePoint. Just makes it so much easier to get to where you want to be with these things. And then up here, they talk about using Flow to do work on lists. So quite an impressive demo. They're actually using, again, artificial intelligence to analyze an image and then categorize it according to what it saw within the image, having trained it on the kind of products that they have. So I think that's quite futuristic, but they claim it's there and pretty much ready to use. And the last thing that struck me was announced in 2018, but it was announced to developers. And it was only at this conference that I started seeing vendors and people talk about how it would be used out there in the wild. And it's called adaptive cards. The idea of adaptive cards is that as a developer, you can say, for example, I want to show this text with these fields and have these 3 choice buttons. And then each of the applications will render it in a way that's consistent with its own interface. On Skype, you get big buttons. In Teams, you get the smaller, squarer buttons. On, say, Windows notification, it might look like this. So there's no need for the developer to do the individual styling. And this becomes really useful when you want to integrate other systems. So in the search demo, they were talking about connectors to ServiceNow, which a lot of organizations use for things like raising tickets and so on. So outside the Microsoft stack. But this search result for DG2000 has pulled back a record from ServiceNow. And in the adaptive card, it's pulled back these fields about severity. And you can actually interact with ServiceNow to change a status or close a ticket from within the search results. I've been banging on about this for years. It's been a good thing. So I can't claim Microsoft listened to me, but at least someone has had the same idea and executed it. So that's great. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Dan now, who will talk to us a little about some of the implications. Dan, just give me a second and I shall give you control. Let me just advance the next slide for you. If you want to start talking while we do that.
Thanks, Sam. Yes, what I'm going to start off on is just talking about Microsoft Teams and SharePoint. Microsoft boasted at the conference that Teams is the fastest growing tool that Microsoft has ever seen. They've got over 500,000 organizations using it. And lots of people come to us actually and ask us, can we use Teams as an intranet? And I think I've always been a little bit doubtful about this, but I think actually no is really the answer to this now. I'd say 6 to 12 months ago, SharePoint Modern was making the SharePoint Classic look really clunky. But it also had its own clunkiness. Even when you look at things like comms and hub sites, to me it was still clearly in MVP stage. And I think Teams really started to steal a march on SharePoint. And that's really when that Teams question started to pop up from some of our customers. In fact, I came across someone the other day who'd literally built a whole intranet in Teams. And hadn't really done much at all in SharePoint itself. And he was having all sorts of problems. Things like the navigation becomes very clunky and slow. You know, you can imagine it sort of requires, you know, every time you want to see the next level, it actually requires a physical click. There's no things like mouse overs and expanding menus to kind of give you a sneak preview of what, you know, what you might want to click into. So navigation doesn't work very well. And it's kind of going back to this idea of Teams as an intranet. It's kind of going back to, you know, the intranet as a bunch of files and folders, which we've been desperately trying to move away from for years and years now. So yeah, I wasn't bought on that. But yeah, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of Teams, but for me it serves a set of very distinct purposes. But I think SharePoint Modern now, the progress that we've seen in the last 6 months has really kind of reestablished this clear delineation between Teams and SharePoint. You know, we've got these changes that Sam has been talking about, was talking about earlier on, the Megamenu, the home sites, and the stuff that Joe was talking about, the targeting, search. But we've also seen lots and lots of really nice little enhancements as well. So the interface is becoming much, much more fluid with SharePoint Modern. We're seeing much richer functionalities, many more web parts, and many more integrations with various parts of Office 365, which coincidentally, or not in fact, was the most requested thing in our poll at the start. And yeah, I think speed is also much, much better in SharePoint Modern. And I think, yeah, that's really kind of making a difference with Teams. But let's talk a little bit about a subject which is dear to both our hearts, Sam, which is the build versus buy argument. Yeah. What are your thoughts on this then?
Yeah, so I mean, at Clearbox, we do this independent buyer's guide to SharePoint Intranet in a box report, and we've seen that market grow enormously from about 6 products about 8 years ago through to over 80 now. There's a bit of me just to reduce my headaches, would like to see this market shrink again by Microsoft taking some of the more simpler ones out there. I do think now if you've got maybe just 200, 300 employees, or you're relatively simple structurally as an organization, say you might be a retailer, or you sell our car tires and exhaust, but you do it in 100 locations, even if you've got 500 employees, that structure, that's not too hard. And it's probably worth at least doing a proof of concept with standard SharePoint. But for anyone larger or more complex, I think the reality is you'll still hit the bumpers in quite a few places. So one is multilingual. Now, Microsoft has said it's coming later this year. And what they hinted at is that if, for example, you create an English page, then the multilingual will manage creating a French one and an Italian one and let you swap between. But I imagine it will be pretty rudimentary in the first stab. They seem dismissive about using, say, automatic language translation and managing that kind of editing process and workflow. So don't expect that anytime soon.
On that topic, Sam, do you think the intranet in a box vendors have nailed multilingual?
We saw a really strong showing in the current 2019 edition compared to the year before. Yeah, so you can definitely find a very good solution to the multilingual challenge now across certainly a dozen of the vendors plus. When it comes to news, so we deal a lot with internal comms people, and internal comms people, I think, like to see something which is like the news central of all the news stories, whether they've been published or whether they're pending approval or whether they're queued up to go live the following morning. You don't really get that with any part of SharePoint right now. It is something that most of the internet in a box vendors add. Instead, the information architecture of Microsoft's mental model seems to be much more that there will be hundreds of separate sites set up as like team sites or communication sites. And then you try to pull them together with things like hub sites to automatically aggregate. Whereas for many corporate intranets, the mental model is completely the way around, that you would probably start with the corporate-wide stuff and then go out to the periphery for sites that maybe just are regional or team-centric. That second kind of scenario is still really hard to do with native SharePoint. And then on the social side, I still kind of miss the community sites that came out in SharePoint 2013, because they had things like moderation. They had things like an aggregated activity feed. Yammer's coming along a bit, but you still can't, for example, make comments on news stories in communication sites, something that would show up in Yammer. It's an entirely separate social feed. And there are page templates, so you can say everybody's department landing page has to have this format, but there aren't site templates, so you can't say a whole department site should follow this standard structure, which from a user point of view is a bit of a miss. It would be really handy to say, as you move from finance to marketing, they all had a similar kind of menu layout to them. And classic UI is still around a bit in the inner box products. Dan, what do you think? Is there still a role for classic user interface at all?
Yeah, I think I think we see classic dying, but there are some people who still, I think that one of the key drivers for classic is the branding. If you want that really kind of strong branding, if that's really important to you to control that, then classic's the answer. And obviously Microsoft is heavily recommending that you don't try to overbrand modern sites. So yeah, I think that's the clearest business case for going classic for us. But it's a tough one to make, I think.
And we did say we get on to Q&A. So do you want to just quickly talk to this slide, Dan, and then we'll take some questions?
Sure. Yeah, I just put this slide together, sort of really kind of making the case still for intranet in a box, in spite of the leaps and bounds that Microsoft has advanced with SharePoint. But for me, these are the kind of the important things, and the things that we keep hearing about from our customers is that they want sophisticated news functionality. They want things like subscriptions, they want mandatory reads, they want the ability to target notifications on mobile, they want news channels, notice boards. There's lots and lots of stuff there, and I don't think Microsoft is there yet with their news functionality. And whether they'll ever get there, I don't know. I think then is the mega menu. I think the jury's still out on exactly where this is going, but certainly, and obviously some of these comments about the case for IIAB are sort of focused on wisdom, because that's the product that we really know very well. But the mega menu there is, there's lots of, you can have images in there, you can have obviously links, categories, you can put content in there, even dynamic content, and I think that's something that we've seen is very, very popular, and I wonder if Microsoft is actually going to go there with its mega menu. Then we've got things like tools and bolt-ons as well that some of the intranet in a box vendors are coming out with now. So policy management tools, service desk, event management. We're seeing bots, bolt-on bots. That type of thing. Then moving on to content governance, there's not a huge amount of sort of built-in tools for content governance. Editor dashboards and sort of rich tagging and metadata. I would say that's still pretty thin on the ground. And the same when it comes to governance for collaboration tools. I think one of the things that we have seen is, this ability to actually provision Office 365 tools via the intranet. So things like, Teams and Yammer, being able to provision those communities and groups is through your intranet. It's actually a really cool feature, because you can kind of part automate it and introduce workflows and things like that. And then,
Dan, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
We do have quite a lot of questions. Would you mind if we just jump into those?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, absolutely.
Wedge, where would you like us to start?
Well, as you can imagine, home sites are very popular. Leslie has colleagues that share workstations, no log on. So Leslie's wondering if people can access home sites and news content with a shared login or with no login, no authentication. What do you think?
Well, I don't think home sites would change that position. And maybe Joe knows of a way to do unauthenticated access to Office 365. But
no, you've pointed out perfectly. Non-authenticated is kind of the key thing there. It's not a public-facing website. There's always going to need to be an authentication, whether it's a personal email address, so a Hotmail, an Outlook address, or it's an actual corporate identity. There's always going to have to be some sort of authentication there. You can obviously use a shared logon, so that is one approach we often see customers take, but home sites aren't going to change anything there.
Yeah. Okay.
And Radek simply asks, how many home sites can we have in a site collection or within an organization?
Oh, I can answer this.
Yeah.
One.
Yeah, exactly.
Literally one.
Yeah, I think Microsoft are wanting to hear feedback of use cases of if you do need more, but yeah, there's a hard one limit at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, if you had multiple brands in one tenant, it might be an issue. If you're like a Unilever but wanted Ben & Jerry's to go to Ben & Jerry's, you wouldn't be able to do that with a home site just yet. Next one, Wedge. Keep them nice and easy like that.
Okay, this one might be for Joe. Steve asks about Microsoft Search. Is it also going to be within the Outlook 365 desktop app? So not the browser, but Outlook generally.
I can't give a definitive yes. I would imagine the answer would be yes. They're certainly bringing it to Windows Search. So your Windows 10 bottom left corner, carry out a search there. You're going to start seeing that experience come there on enterprise computers. They've said it's going to come to productivity apps. So you saw from the screenshot, you saw a PowerPoint. I would imagine the logical step is to bring it into Outlook. You started having it in Outlook online. I'd imagine you'll start seeing it on the desktop as well.
Okay. Louise asks about OneDrive. When someone leaves the business and their OneDrive is full of their files and no one can access them, is there an easy mechanism to drag those files somewhere else or into SharePoint? Can the manager control somebody else's OneDrive?
So there is a thing called automatic access delegation with OneDrive, which an admin can set up. So usually what you would say is when someone leaves the company, their line manager using Active Directory would inherit that OneDrive. But of course, then a lot is down to your company governance to say, what should that manager do with it? And you would hope they triage and get rid of anything that is individual, and anything that should have been at team level anyway should go on the team site, for example.
Okay.
Joe, anything to add to that?
No, I mean, you've said exactly what I'd say. The automatic delegations, the first port of call for me. There's nothing to extend on top of that.
Yeah. Let's keep going with the questions, Wedge. I'm just going to put some adverts rolling by as we talk.
Joe, Owain asks about the configuration ability of Microsoft Search. Can we ensure the right content is shown in search results?
Okay, so we're more limited when it comes to Microsoft Search. So SharePoint Search, we're used to kind of query rules, query suggestions. It's full of kind of rich features like that. Microsoft Search right now, we're not going to have as much flexibility like that. We're not being told exactly what you can't and can do, but from what it would appear is it looks like it's heavily integrated with Microsoft Graph, and therefore we're going to be it's going to be quite rigid in its what you can change there.
Okay, James asks if Microsoft Search can cope with information from outside the Microsoft estate. Is it enterprise search yet?
Again, not a whole lot has been released around kind of integration with third-party platforms. I mentioned kind of enterprise graphs, and there's a Microsoft project out there around enterprise graphs, and it's something that's quite interesting. The connection of your business apps, not only Office 365 but other apps out there. There's nothing right now that's going to allow you to pull in information kind of through a nice clean way. There's certainly things you can do with potentially Flow and using the connections that are available inside of Flow to kind of redistribute information, but not so easy just to index multiple sources right now.
If that's a need you have, I'd recommend looking at BA Insight for the moment.
Yep.
What they demoed was that, for example, integration with not Workday, sorry, ServiceNow. So those connectors are coming, but we don't really know when. Next one, Wedge.
Okay, well, there's so many, I'm getting over them. He asks about hard to reach people and those workers who may not be at a desktop and do not need to collaborate. What did you see at the conference for them aside from Kaizala?
Oh, Kaizala was going to be my answer. That's what I saw. Yeah, for hard to reach employees, I think Microsoft's position is that that's why everything is responsive and that they should be using the mobile SharePoint app.
Yeah, I think pushing the home site to the as the first page on the SharePoint app is a big win as well for those people.
Yeah. And we had a couple of questions where to think about is Microsoft serious about Yammer anymore, and is that the social solution?
Yes, there are people.
I did get the impression that they see new life in Yammer, and I know there's been other conferences where there's been loads of interest in Yammer. It's maybe nowhere near as end of life as people think. It's chugging along quite happily. It's just looking a bit tired and not very exciting. My hope is that all the investment they put into the back end will now give them a better platform for doing more exciting things on the front end.
Yeah, I think one of the things with Yammer that could point to it having a really bright future is, if they do get all of these integrations right with the rest of Office 365 using things like Graph, then Yammer's got some things which are like big requests that we see all the time that we can't deliver, and that's like an activity feed across all of Office 365, and another one is the ability to follow individuals. But obviously get not just the stuff that they put into Yammer, but across Office 365. I think that would be an interesting way for them to go.
Yes. I think we're going to have to wrap it up there because we're on the hour. But Dan, Joe, thank you ever so much. Wedge, thank you for hosting, and thank you everybody else for joining us in the webinar.